So good evening, and we're getting close to the retreat ending. So actually this is just the first part of the retreat, and the second part is your life. Because wherever you go, there you are, and this is the practice. And we'll speak tomorrow about integration, as well as resources that can help support you with the practice. But it really is a journey, and it really is, this practice is a way of life. And it begins inside ourselves. I'd like to start with a beautiful poem by Mary Oliver. I trust a number of you have heard this. And nevertheless, every time I recite it or read it, it still just touches my heart. It's called The Journey. For we're all on a journey in life. She says, one day you finally knew what you had to do and began. And though the voices around you, they kept shouting out their bad advice, and though the whole house began to tremble and you felt that old tug of your ankles as each voice cried out to you to help me, to help mend my life. But this time you didn't stop and you knew what you had to do. And though the wind pried with its stiff fingers and the melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough and it was a wild night and the road was full of fallen branches and stones. And little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of the clouds, and there was a new voice. There was a new voice that you slowly recognized as your own, and it kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. And there was a new voice that you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. To save the only life you could save, which is, of course, ourselves. And to me, when we look at our mindfulness practice, and Jen actually referred to this last night, like being two wings of a bird, and one of the wings is awareness, mindfulness, and the other is love or compassion. And that's what it really boils down to. And actually, even in Mandarin, Chinese language, the word for mindfulness, the character of the word for mindfulness is heart and mind. Like they're like both together. So you can't separate the heart. So maybe we could call mindfulness heartfulness or kindfulness. Because right within this ancient Chinese word for the word mindfulness is heart as well. It's indivisible. The two wings of a bird that makes a bird fly, of course. So tonight I want to spend some time speaking about the practices of the heart. And it's quite natural as we sit with ourselves that the heart begins to arise, and sometimes painful feelings may arise, aspirations may arise, regrets, remorse, shames, guilts, insights, and so forth arise as we sit with ourselves. And to me, I'm 65 now, and according to lifetime averages, I still have maybe a little bit of time, but definitely have lived more of my life than what's up ahead of me, unless I can live to 130. And, who knows? Who knows? I have like an aspiration, and that is to make peace. To make peace with myself, to make peace with everything and everyone. I don't want to die with a resentment in my heart. And that's a pretty big work, because if I really look at the resentment or grudges that I have in my heart, I've been carrying along with me a book, a big book with many volumes, written in very small font of who has fucked me over since I was born. And you tend not to forget who's pissed you off, who's hurt your feelings. So I know there's a lot of work to be done. But to make peace, to me, is what else is there to do to make peace? Makes the most sense. And fortunately, I have a wonderful teacher. Jan shared about some aspects of my mom that she was admiring, and I want to speak about Jan's mom, Charmaine, who has really been a very important teacher for me in my life. And Charmaine, like all of us, had many blessings and many challenges, a lot of pain. She experienced betrayal multiple times, and she had, I think the world would say she would have very good reasons to hold some resentment towards some that hurt her, that betrayed her. And yet I saw her as she aged and got ill and eventually died, that she had this quality, and she wasn't a meditator, she didn't hardly even go to church, but she had this inherent beautiful qualities within her, and it really felt to me like she had no enemies, had no resentments towards anyone, even her ex-husband who had betrayed her. She not only did not speak bad about him, but actually often inquired, how is he doing, hoping he is well. And that always just really, really touched me, that she had somehow, in her own way, wished wellness and goodness for him. That's quite something. And I really she really touched me deeply, and that if she can forgive and reconcile, this is a wonderful teaching that I can begin to do, and the harborings of the pains that I hold on to. To me, there's 3 very important practices in making peace, making amends, reconciling. 3 very important areas that when practiced and experienced, it's like a perfection, it's like a ruby, it's like a diamond. It completes, it evaporates the hardened heart. So the first is to reconcile to the times that you've been hard on yourself. The second is to reconcile for those that you have hurt. And the third is to reconcile to those that have hurt me. That's a tall order, isn't it? Reconciling to myself, to the times I've been hard on myself, reconciling to those I've hurt, reconciling to those that have hurt me. That's why it's so helpful in conjunction with the insight mindfulness practices for us to begin to see these stories we've been speaking about that have enslaved us, these identifications of unworthiness, deficiency, inadequacy. And perhaps as we begin to see them and to begin to see that that's not all of me, begin to become free of these stories that have enslaved us, we begin to open into ourselves with greater compassion. That reconciling begins to happen through our understanding. Yes, it may be helpful to place a hand on the heart, but much more helpful to understand why you're putting a hand on your heart and understanding what's fueling and driving the sense of self-loathing and beginning to see through that identification and know that it's not fully you. So the insight begins to help dissolve this. Don Miguel Ruiz says that we must forgive those that we feel that have wronged us, not because they deserve to be forgiven, but because we love ourselves so much, we don't want to keep on paying for the injustice. So even applying to ourselves, so long as we keep on punishing ourselves, and I trust that many of us saw this during this retreat, these little snide comments, these little self-defecations, these little places where we're putting ourselves down. So reconciling to the times I've been hard on myself. And there's reasons, again, on why we do this, born out of our conditioning. So again, the complement of insight to help us see more clearly into this conditioning, perhaps becoming more free. Galway Cannell writes a very beautiful poem about this aspect about ourselves and reaching with love. And he says that the bud stands for all things, even for the things that don't flower. For everything flowers from within of self-blessing, though sometimes it's necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness. To put the hand on the brow of a flower and to retell it in words and in touch that it is lovely, until it flowers from within of self-blessing, just as St. Francis put his hand on the creased forehead of the sow and told her in words and touch the blessings of the earth upon you. And the sow began remembering all down her thick length, from her earthen snout and all the way through the fodder and slops to the spiritual curl of the tail, from the hard spininess spiked out from the spine and down through the great broken heart to the sheer blue milken dreaminess spurting and shuddering from the 14 teats in the 14 mouths, sucking and blowing beneath them the long, perfect loveliness of a sow. So sometimes we have to put our own hand on the brow and tell to ourselves in word and touch of our own self-blessing. Sometimes it's necessary to reteach a thing its loveliness. So perhaps it's part of beginning to make peace with ourselves, is reteaching ourselves this thing of loveliness. And so this is a deep, deep work, the work of our own hearts to, in my own experience, the most difficult person to forgive or to reconcile is myself, is oneself. I dare you to forgive. Mm-hmm. I double dare you, even triple dare you. One of the most radical notions that we could do is to begin to give ourselves a break, to begin to have compassion for this past conditioning and to see that it no longer serves us. So this is a deep work. The second, this reconciliation to those that we've hurt. It's very humbling to recognize that and own and acknowledge that there's been times due to unskillfulness, due to woundedness, due to fear, due to unawareness, due to old conditioning that I have actually hurt another. if not physically, then more of the time perhaps emotionally or mentally. And hurting another person's feelings is a big pain. It's painful to hurt another. Of course, at times we have this righteous indignation that they deserve it. But later, if we sit upon and recognize the pain that we've caused another, it's really painful in the heart. And there's times, of course, that we've caused some pain to another knowingly or unknowingly. Yeah, it's very humbling to know that just as we may have difficult people in our lives that cause pain to us, that we also are a difficult person for another. It's the humble pie. And so this second area, making amends, reconciling to those I've hurt, is a very important practice. Also cleansing the heart. Perhaps again with insight, with understanding. Sometimes I like to call this hindsight wisdom. When I look back at where I was then, what was going on in my life, I can understand more why I may have lashed out, why I may have unskillfully done something that caused someone some pain. So sometimes as present time, we can look back and gain some understanding of, oh, this was coming out of my old wounded conditioning, out of my unawareness. So this wisdom is very helpful for us to understand. And in the Dharma, there's a very beautiful teaching called Hiri Otapa. And what this poetically means is, it's a very beautiful phrase. It's called becoming a guardian of the world. And a guardian of the world is a protector. And what that means in regards to reconciling to those I've hurt, in particular, is that once you recognize and acknowledge that you did indeed cause some pain, and you acknowledge where it came from and the conditions that you were living with at the time, and you understand them, and you understand that, yes, that was indeed painful, and then because of that, you learn from it. Maybe we could call it a sense of conscience. But you learn from it, and then you aspire to not to try to repeat that again. You do the best that you can. But when you learn from those actions that cause pain and you try not to do it again, in the Dharma, that's how you pay it back. It's very beautiful. That's how you pay it back. We pay it back by not trying to repeat it. Then we become what's known as a guardian of the world. That is such a beautiful thing, a protector. You become a protector. You learn from your mistakes, and then you protect. That's how you pay it back. A number of years ago, I met a gentleman named Claude Shin Thomas. He's a Zen monk, American Zen monk. Short guy with bald head and wears robes. And I didn't know much about him, but he was giving a Dharma talk, and I was there, and he went to tell a little bit about his life story. And his life story was that he came from a military family, and when the Vietnam War came around, he enlisted, and he got trained as a machine gunner on a helicopter. And he would say that this was my job. My job was to kill people. And by the end of the war, I had killed over 350 men, women, and children. And actually, after many missions, whoever got the most kills would get a bag of heroin, get a bag of some types of drugs or alcohol. And so by the end of the war, he was a drug addict. He's living out on the streets in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania after the war. And very lost, very confused, a lot of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Sometimes we call it post-Trump domestic order. New name. But he was really messed up. And somehow he had connected with a social worker that saw something in him and believed in him. And Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese meditation teacher, was offering retreats to American Vietnam veterans to help heal the wounds of war, and she convinced him to go. And he went. And it was the beginning of a profound change of his life. He eventually got off drugs. He got into a halfway house. He started practicing meditation all the time. Then he met Bernie Glassman, who was a head of the Zen Peacemaker Order. And he really connected with this particular form of Zen. And he asked Bernie Glassman if he could become a Zen monk. Bernie Glassman, knowing of Claude Hashim's past, said, yes, I will ordain you, but we're going to ordain you in a very unique and special place. And so they flew to Poland, and they went to Auschwitz, and they ordained him as a Zen monk on the train platform in Auschwitz. And then Claude Hashim Thomas, having a bit of a sense of humor, said, then I took a left, and I began to walk. And I walked for a year and a half overland from Auschwitz to Saigon. And everywhere he went, his Dharma teaching, and it is even to this day, is to tell anyone who will listen to him what it is like to have depersonalized himself against all these people and having killed over 350 men, women, and children. And that this is like, what is it like to kill so many people? And he, even to this day, this is his dharma, is to go around in war zones, inner city, prisons, anyone that will listen to him, to talk about what is it like, what type of mindset did he have when he was a machine gunner, what type of effect it had on him, and where he is now. And he's like a modern-day Angulimala. In the Buddhist text is a story about a murderer. His name was Angulimala, which means a garland of fingers, because whenever Angulimala would kill a person, he would tie the fingers onto a long necklace. And it turned out that he had just one more space left and saw the Buddha and said, oh, I'm going to kill the Buddha. That would be great to finally finish my necklace of fingers and have the Buddha's fingers on there. So the Buddha evidently read his mind, and so Angulimala starts going towards the Buddha, but the Buddha performed this type of miracle where no matter how close Angulimala approached the Buddha, he was always the same distance away. And so then after a while, Anguli's starting to run, and still the same distance away, and then charging at him, and I'm going to get him, I want to kill him, charging at him, and still the same distance away. And finally Angulimala fell to the ground, just totally exhausted. And then Angulimala heard a few footsteps come up to him, and it was the Buddha. And the Buddha said, what are you doing? And then Angulimala said, well, this is what my teacher said. I got to collect some thumbs, and I'm going to be able to be happy and get these fingers. And the Buddha said, this is not the way to peace. And then, as all these stories go, like he taught Angulimala the Dhamma right there and then. And right there and then, he awakened. A murderer. He awakened. And then he said to the Buddha, I want to become a monk. So in those days, it was very easy to become a monk. It was just two words. It was Ehi Bhikkhu, which meant come monk. Now he's a monk. That was his ordination. Ehi Bhikkhu, come monk. You're now a monk. And it's a very powerful story of, and I find that like Claude Hashim Thomas is like a modern day Angulimala, having killed so many people and then realizing what that did to him, and the drug addiction and the craziness, and then the repentance, and then he's like a guardian of the world. He goes around telling what it's like to do this and what this caused him. This does not need to be repeated. Making peace to those you've hurt. That's kind of an extreme story. Making peace to those I've hurt. So in our lives, there's been times where we have been unskillful, caused some pain. Making peace. Even if they are not here anymore, and we can't talk to them in person, or maybe they are here, but it may not be so wise and skillful to talk to that person. But at least I know for myself, I own my part in it, and I try not to repeat it, and that's how it gets paid back, and we become our guardian of the world. It's a powerful and beautiful practice. The last facet of this jewel is the reconciling to those that have hurt me. This is not easy. It's not easy. At the same time, it's not easy to be continuing to harbor resentment and grudges and ill will towards another. Yes, there's a lot of righteous indignation. They deserved it and so forth. And often we're pointing the finger at this person, but we don't realize when we point the finger, we usually point one finger, but there's 3 fingers pointing back, and meaning that I'm the one that's continuing to suffer. Just like if you got hit by an arrow, and rather than pulling that arrow out that's been piercing your skin, you start thinking about, well, why did the person pull the arrow out? Or they're bad. They shouldn't have done that. And of course, I mean, there's all those things. But actually, if you're in a lot of suffering, let's pull the arrow out. It hurts. So long as we continue to harbor resentment and grudges, we will continue to suffer. Because living with a hardened heart is a painful heart. Hafiz says, how did the rose ever open to show all its beauty to the world? It felt the encouragement of the light against its being. It felt the encouragement of the light against its being. Otherwise, we will all remain too frightened. It says that. Otherwise, we'll all remain too frightened. Feeling that encouragement of the light against our being, this possibility that we can reconcile. Otherwise, we will all remain too frightened. This reconciling to those that have hurt me. And perhaps it's helpful also just to recognize that, yes, in times as I look back on my past, when I have hurt another, I want to just own and acknowledge that it came from my own unawareness, my own woundedness, my own conditioning. So perhaps that understanding can begin to arise that just as I have hurt another born out of this unawareness, this woundedness and conditioning, so too those that have hurt me, that has come from their woundedness, their unawareness, their old conditioning, and not that that excuses the action, because it did happen, but perhaps it brings some sense of understanding to it. And that, again, the marriage of insight and love, the insight and compassion, this understanding, helps us to hold it perhaps in a different perspective. It doesn't excuse the action, but that understanding begins to help us to perhaps have a more wiser relationship with it. And perhaps also this understanding that so long as I continue to harbor that grudge, I continue to suffer. And in the spirit of not wanting to suffer and to becoming more free of suffering, it might be wise for me to begin to neutralize the resentments and the grudges and the ill will that I'm harboring upon another. There's a very beautiful and interesting translation of the Book of Psalms by a Zen priest named Norman Fisher. And one of the things that I like about this translation, in some of the old biblical language, they use some very strong words, like the person was wicked, they were unrighteous, they were evil, they were bad. That sound kind of like, at least in English, some of this language is very strong language. And he changed all of those words, saying they were heedless, they were unmindful, they were unaware. And that is a very interesting perspective, because there's a difference between unawareness and evil. And and when I look at, was I really evil when I hurt someone, or was it really coming from a place of unawareness, of my own woundedness, my own distortions of things? So I love that notion that, they were not being mindful. they haven't learned to be kind yet. And so there's a sense of this unawareness that causes such pain. It's very intermeshed with our narcissism, and we have to feel that we're more important than people who are lower, but born out of deep insecurity. So this reconciliation to the times I've been hard on myself, to the times I've hurt others, to the times others have hurt me. A very powerful practice, to me, one of the most important practices one could ever embark upon, making peace. And the peace begins inside us. In the teachings of the Dharma, it says that hatred never ceases by hatred. Only love ceases hatred. This is a universal law. Hatred never ceases by hatred. And so in the Dharma teachings too, we can begin to take responsibility. If indeed our mind is the creator of our own heaven and our own hell through our own thoughts, we can begin to take responsibility for ourselves. And particularly if I begin to see that I am the recipient of my actions. Just like we say, we throw dust into the wind, it sometimes hits you right back in the face, whether it's immediately or a little bit later, or sometime later. That we are the recipient of our actions. And that our mind is a creator of its own heavens and hells. And how do we begin to take responsibility for ourselves in our life to make peace? And there's always options. I was happy reading in American history about Abraham Lincoln, who was, during his time as president, abolished slavery in the 1800s. But there's a story where during the Civil War that President Lincoln had an occasion at an official reception to refer to the Southerners, because it was the Northerners against the Southerners, but he referred to them as erring human beings rather than foes to be exterminated. So again, erring, which is more like unmindful. But then there was an elderly, fiery patriot woman that rebuked him for speaking kindly of his enemies when he ought to think about destroying them. But Lincoln said, "Why, madame? Why should I destroy my enemies when I can make them my friends?" That's a beautiful way. Why destroy my enemies when I can make them my friends? And again, another just really incredible being, Martin Luther King. He says the ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. And instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence, you may murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And I have to say to you that I've decided to stick to love. I know that love is ultimately the only answer to the problems of humanity. I say to myself that hate is too great of a burden to bear. I have decided to love. If you're seeking the highest good, I think you can find it through love. Martin Luther King. Very beautiful. Love is so powerful, it breaks the barriers of pride, of greed, of hatred, of jealousy. There's a term in the Dharma called metta citta vimutti, which means the liberation of the mind through unconditioned or universal love. This unconditional love breaks the barriers of narcissism, egocentricity. There's a very powerful poem that speaks of this, again from Hafiz, a Persian poet, where he says, I've learned so much from the divine, that I can no longer call myself a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, or a Jew. The truth has shared so much of itself with me that I can no longer call myself a man, a woman. Love has befriended Hafiz so completely. It has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind and heart has ever known. I just love this. It's like an explosion, explosion. Love has befriended Hafiz so completely. It has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and every image my mind and heart has ever known. That is what it is to be blown away by love. It's really powerful. Love has befriended Hafiz so completely. It has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind and my heart has ever known. So beautiful. And so we've explored, as I've just shared with you, about these practices of reconciliation that both Jan and I are deeply involved with this work. We've actually done retreats with these themes, and it's very powerful to dive deep into this reconciling, to make peace, to make amends to ourselves, to those we've hurt, to those that hurt us. And I'd like to also explore other qualities within the Dharma of what's known as the Brahma Viharas, which mean the abodes of the divine. 4 abodes, 4 qualities, we should say. The qualities of metta, of loving kindness, the qualities of karuna, which is compassion, the qualities of mudita, which is sympathetic or appreciative joy. And the last quality is upekkha, which is a balancing, a harmonizing, a equanimity quality. And these qualities often arise quite naturally. I've actually found through my own practice through the years that quite naturally these qualities arise without having to necessarily try to make them happen, though there is practices that we can cultivate those to happen. But quite naturally, for me personally, as I've become more aware and sensitive to the inner workings of my own mind and body and the suffering that I experience or the suffering that I at times give to another, and see that it causes pain, quite naturally, because of that understanding, I aspire to cause as least harm as possible. It's quite a natural evolution of awareness and understanding that the heart begins to open. It doesn't want to cause pain. And there's always some give and take in this, because I think there's actually impossible to cause no pain. But can we practice to cause the least pain as possible? This quality of, in Sanskrit and Pali, ahimsa, the practices of non-harming. So these 4 Brahma Viharas, or the abodes of the divine, are these qualities of metta, loving kindness. And there's a beautiful translation of that, which I'm really fond of. One is friendliness, but the one I really like is that which softens the hardened heart. I like that as a translation. That which softens the hardened heart. And this quality of karuna, joining with suffering, the compassion with suffering, the understanding about pain and joining with it, compassionate holding, the quality of mudita, which is sympathetic or appreciative joy, that I'm so happy with another person's happiness. And this last quality of balance, equanimity, that doesn't mean complacency, disassociation, apathy. Doesn't mean you have to be like Mr. Spock in Star Trek, some type of cold. The equanimity is this understanding of the nature of change. It has the qualities of compassion, loving kindness, appreciative joy, but also that wisdom factor of balance, of understanding. In the practices of loving kindness, there's different ways to practice beginning with yourself, then extending to your teachers or benefactors, and then to those near and dear to you, such as family and friends, more acquaintances and neutral ones, even difficult ones, extending to all human beings, to all living things, extending to this world and throughout this universe. So there's many different ways to practice this, and sometimes it's offered various phrases that you can practice, like may all beings dwell with peace, may all beings be free of pain, and so forth. I always like to recommend for those of us practicing it to find your own words that feel alive and authentic and genuine and real to you. If some of those phrases are resonant with you, it's certainly fine to use them, or you use ones. Make up your own that connect you into the heart. I'll also say that practicing loving kindness at times can be challenging. When I first was introduced to this practice, I thought it was the greatest thing since chocolate. And I just loved the practices of the heart. But then as time went on with my practice, I began to get in touch with I'd practice loving kindness, and I'd get in touch with my resentment and my angers. And I had a nickname for my loving kindness practice. It changed from loving kindness to the hating kindness meditation, because it brought up all my shit. And I used to think, am I not meditating? Like, what's going on here? I'm supposed to be meditating on love, and I just want to fucking kill everybody. And you know, like this, the kind of incongruence. And it took time for me to understand that was very natural. That because we're working on these qualities of the heart, what begins to show up are the qualities that are not so hurtful. And actually, if we recognize that they are your teachers that have come in drag, they have come to wake you up, they've come to show you where you're stuck, where you actually need to bring more attention to, then we can really progress with this practice. So it's very normal. Like sometimes when we're practicing loving kindness, it may bring up a lot of hate. It may bring up a lot of uncomfortable feelings. Then you might say to you, I'm the worst meditator in the world. But this is very normal for these types of things to come up. And this is where the loving kindness practice intermeshes with insight practice, because now it's showing us, here's some areas that are not yet acknowledged. Some places where I'm holding resentment or grudges. I need to bring some attention here and to work with understanding this. So it's a very beautiful practice. It's cultivating the heart, but it's also cultivating at times places where we see that we may need to do a little bit more heart surgery on. So I just want to name that, because sometimes you might think, my gosh, everyone's practicing loving kindness and I'm not feeling any of that. Well, that's important to understand that that's normal. And let's say you're not feeling much of anything, all this lovey-dovey stuff, and I'm just feeling about as empty as you could be, then even emptiness would become part of our meditation practice. Let me bring my awareness to emptiness. Emptiness is my doorway into my heart. Let me feel into the emptiness. Let me feel what it feels like to not feel any love. Let me feel what it feels like to feel separate, disconnected, isolated, so that all of that becomes part of the practice that begins to reconnect us. You know what I mean? Anybody have some stuff come up during loving kindness? Yeah. The hating kindness meditation. But these practices are very powerful, practices of the heart. And I have an old nun friend of mine. I haven't seen her since the 1980s. And she was in robes for some time. Then I think she disrobed, and I haven't seen her in years. I hope she's still well. But I remember her telling me a story when she was in robes and she was in transit and was in New York City. And she just got done with a very, very long meditation retreat. And she had some time before she was moving on to wherever else she was going, and she needed to get some things at a department store. And so she was at one of these New York City department stores, which are like huge, cavernous, multi-floors. It's hard to, if you haven't seen a New York City, one of those stores, it's hard to imagine just like how big they are. And evidently she was down in the basement looking at something, and all of a sudden she was bending over, and all of a sudden she saw two arms coming around her. And she told me this. She said, the first thing that happened was I noted sensation. This is coming off the meditation. Oh, there's sensation. But then she realized this is not good. And she immediately just started sending all this love to this person. She had no idea what was going to happen next. But she just kept on just sending all of her loving kindness to this person. And all of a sudden, the hands just came up like this, almost like electricity. And he turned to her and said, ma'am, I am sorry. I don't know what got into me. I am so sorry. And then just ran away. And she always shared with me that she really felt that was because of this loving kindness. Hard to say. But it's a very powerful story, and I heard it firsthand. These powers of love can transform things. And I often think about, like, even in the darkest of the night, if you light even one candle, it doesn't illuminate the whole sky, but you put up a sun, darkness is gone. But even that one candle in the darkness, if you're nearby it, it dispels that darkness. Love is so powerful, it dispels darkness. But more than it dispelling darkness, it dispels fear. It dispels hate. It dispels separation, isolation, disconnection. There's no greater power than love. So the loving kindness meditation has its roots in the early Buddhist meditative tradition. And it's kind of an interesting story in how that it came about. And there was a group of monks that had heard about a place that was in a very remote region, and it's supposedly a good place to meditate. And so they were with the Buddha and some other monastics, and they parted and let the Buddha know they were going to go away for a few months during the rainy season retreat, for 3 months. And they were going to go to this what they'd heard was this very beautiful forested place. And so they went there, and it was incredibly beautiful. Kind of like here. This incredibly beautiful area here. And they inhabited the forest, and there was plenty of water, and there was firewood, and it was just a perfect, the temperature was good, and it was just a perfect place to practice in. And so they began their practice, and the days turned into a week, and the week turned into 2 weeks, and unbeknownst to the monks, also habitating in that forest before them was tree spirits. And they loved their forest. This was their home. And they were like okay with these monks. They thought that, they'd just be there for a couple of weeks, and then they'd go and everything would be fine. But then after 2 weeks, they weren't going anywhere. And the tree spirits were starting to get annoyed, and so they started to cause some mischief. A monk would sweep a path on the forest floor, and then a few minutes later, it was all covered with leaves again. Someone would gather some water, and then the bucket would be empty. A fire would be on, and the fire would be put out. And they would check with you, did you do that? No. Like, no, I didn't do that. I just swept the forest. I wouldn't have put leaves, and so forth. And so they thought that was peculiar. But they said, all right, these things happen in the forest, and we'll just continue meditating. The tree spirits were really hoping that they would leave at that point, but they weren't, and they looked like they were just even more settled in, and they started getting really angry, and that we have to take drastic measures. And they had magical powers, and they could transform they were very beautiful looking, incredibly beautiful, with fine clothing, and their smell was like of sandalwood. Their voices were like a song. But they had the magical powers to transform themselves into hideous and scary-looking beings. And then rather than that sandalwood smell, they could actually, from their bodies, emit a stinking stench like a toilet. And then their voices that were like a song, it was screeching and howling that could almost like break glass and break your eardrums. And so these tree spirits pounced on these monks with these howls and smelling terrible scents and scary-looking appearances, and that did it. Those monks fled the forest. This was haunted. And so they eventually got back to where the Buddha was and the other monastics, and the Buddha said to them, what are you doing here? And so then they explained the story of what happened, and then the Buddha said, well, I'd like you to go back. And they go, what? I'd like you to go back, and I'm going to introduce you to a meditation, and I want you to practice it every step of the way back. And they said, oh, well, what meditation? And they go, this is the meditation on loving kindness. So they turned around. All right, we'll give it a try. This is the Buddha, after all. And so they began to walk, lifting, moving, and placing, and practicing these qualities of the heart. Here's often what's known as the Metta Sutta, that the monastics will chant on the teachings of loving kindness. So I'll maybe share a little bit of this with you. And this is what they chanted and practiced. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, and unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, and wishing in gladness and in safety may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great, the mighty, the medium, the short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and those living far away. I love this next one. Those born and those yet to even being born, covering even the future. Those born and those yet even to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any way. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects her life, her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart, one should cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths. May all beings be with peace, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down. Free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. The pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from desires, is not born again into this world. These beautiful qualities of the heart. And so these monks were practicing these qualities of that which softens the hardened heart. These qualities of kindness, of love, with each step lifting and moving and placing. And so they proceeded towards the forest, and the tree spirits were looking out from the trees and saw the group of monks coming back again. Without even talking to one another, they instantly all changed from their beautiful, translucent, sweet-smelling images and bodies and transformed themselves even into more ghastliest, hideous-looking appearances that would scare you, that smells that stunk so terrible, and of course their screeching howls, and they got ready to pounce on those monks once and for all, magnified much more than before, and eliminate those monks so that they'll never come here again. How dare they to start coming here? Meanwhile, the monks are just still walking, lifting, moving, placing. May all beings be with peace. And so there's kind of a tension building. These tree spirit guys are going to kill these monks. And the monks, meanwhile, kind of oblivious. They're just so blissed out with loving kindness and lifting, moving, placing, and loving, loving, loving. And so it's getting closer, and it's getting closer, and it's getting closer. And at a certain point, they were just about getting ready to pounce on these monks and kill them, and that'll just end it. Just at that moment, when we were about to pounce, there was this kind of wave of gentleness that entered into the forest, a benevolence, like a breeze that was just so kind and warm and cool and soft. And the tree spirits were like taken with this quality of the heart. Whenever I tell this story, I can almost like feel it. Feel that sense of that kindness entering into the forest. The tree spirits were so taken with these qualities of the heart. Without again talking with one another, they instantly transformed themselves into their beautiful and radiant and translucent appearances. Some of the tree spirits started sweeping the forest floors. Others gathered some water. Some started a fire. And they greeted those monks. They were so taken with these qualities of the heart. They asked the monks, can we practice with you? And so the monks, of course, said yes. And of course, as some of these Dharma stories go, they all meditated. And by the end of the summer, they all got enlightened and they all lived happily ever after. May we never underestimate these powers of love. I mean it. Henry James says that there's three very important things in life. He says the first one is to be kind. And the second one is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. And we never underestimate the powers of love. And in the Dharma, they speak about 11 different benefits of practicing loving kindness. So I'll read them off to you. The first one is you will sleep peacefully. Second, you'll have pleasant dreams. Third is you'll wake up peacefully. Fourth is you'll be loved by human beings. Fifth, you'll be loved by the animals. Six, you'll be protected by from the celestial beings. 7, you'll be protected from outer harm. 8, your mind will be joyful and unified. And for those of us concerned about our skin, number 9, you'll have a bright and serene complexion. Forget about your oils. You just have to practice love and that will happen. And then 10, you will die peacefully. And 11, if you're not fully enlightened, you'll have a fortunate rebirth. Such as the powers of love. So may we never underestimate this. And this is something that I feel like as human beings, we long for this love. And Hafiz has a very beautiful teaching about this. It's called Admit Something. He says, everyone you see, you say to them, love me. But of course, you won't say this out loud, otherwise somebody might call the police. Still, though, think about this great pull in us to connect with each other. So why not become the one who lives with a full moon in each eye, that's always saying in that sweet moon language what every other eye and heart in this world is dying to hear, love me. Why not be that one? Why not be that one who lives with a full moon in each eye that's saying in that sweet moon language what every other eye and heart in this world is dying to hear, love me. Why not be that one? So let's just sit for a few moments. I think our time is here. And so I'd like to end with a very beautiful poem. Truly one of my favorites, called Kindness, by an American Palestinian poet. Her name is Naomi Shihab. It's called Kindness. And it really feels like these teachings really come from a lineage of kindness. I think the Dalai Lama said that, my religion is kindness. So this is a poem called Kindness, and it really is very, I won't go into all the detail, but Naomi Shihab wrote this after having a horrifying experience where somebody was killed. And she sat down, and after this happened in some town plaza in Colombia, and she just wrote this on the spot. She says, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things and feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. And what you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go. So you know how desolate the landscapes can be between the regions of kindness. And how you ride, thinking the bus will never stop and the passengers eating corn and chicken will stare out those windows forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where an Indian in a white poncho lies dead on the side of the road, and you must see how this could be you. And how that he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness is the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing, and you must wake up with sorrow and speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of that cloth. And then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. It's only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters, purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. And then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. So may all beings discover the gateways into the heart, and may there be peace. So thank you so much, and perhaps during your walking practice to reflect upon on this reconciliation to the times I've been hard on myself, the times perhaps I've hurt others, times others have hurt me, making peace. And I think tonight when we come back at 9, we'll just enjoy some silence together. You're welcome to continue with that, opening the heart if that feels helpful, or just being with whatever practice serves you to be here. And perhaps tomorrow morning we'll do a little bit more of a formal loving kindness meditation. So thank you, and carrying on.